You know that a lioness would die for her cubs. The bond between mother and child is the only force in nature stronger than the instinct to survive. But on the morning of September 4th, that bond was tested by a force of pure destruction. Titan, a nomadic male notorious for killing the cubs of rival prides, entered the territory of the Marsh Pride. His goal was simple: eliminate the bloodline. He targeted the smallest cub, a male with a broken leg who couldn't run. Titan moved in for the kill, expecting the mother to retreat, as instinct dictates when facing a superior male. But Cari didn't read the rulebook. Instead of submitting, she entered a state of hyper-aggression, rarely documented by science. She didn't just defend, she attacked. She threw herself into the jaws of a beast twice her weight, fueled by a rage that terrified even the other males watching. What happened in the next 15 minutes defied physics, logic, and biology. If you love stories of impossible survival, hit that like button. You don't want to miss the fury of a mother scorned. To understand the impossibility of what Cari did, you first have to understand the machine she was fighting against. Titan was not just a lion. In the sprawling, sun-baked theaters of the Serengeti, he was a biological inevitability, a creature designed by millions of years of evolution for one singular purpose: dominance. When researchers first collared him in 2018, they noted his weight at 225 kilograms, nearly 500 pounds of dense, fast-twitch muscle wrapped in scarred, tawny skin. His mane was thick and black, a visual signal to every other living thing on the plains that he possessed superior testosterone levels, superior genetics, and a superior capacity for violence. Most male lions are lazy. They sleep 20 hours a day, relying on the females to hunt, saving their energy for the occasional border patrol or territorial dispute. But Titan was different. Titan was a nomad. And in the brutal calculus of the African savannah, a nomad is a ghost. He has no territory, no pride to protect him, and no steady supply of food. He eats what he kills. He survives only as long as he can fight. 3 weeks before he crossed into the Marsh Pride's land, a camera trap near the riverbed captured Titan taking down a buffalo, alone. Usually, a buffalo hunt requires a coordinated team of 3 to 5 lionesses. It is a siege, a tactical operation of flanking and endurance. Titan did it by brute force. He hit the 800-kilogram bull like a runaway freight train, latching onto the spine and using his sheer mass to drag the beast to the ground. The footage is grainy, shot in the green hue of night vision, but it shows something that chilled the biologists who reviewed it. Titan didn't wait for the buffalo to die before he started eating. He was efficient, he was cruel, and most terrifying of all, he was hungry for more than just meat. He was hunting for a legacy, and that brought him to the edge of the marsh. The Marsh Pride had known peace for 2 years. It was a golden age, a rare window of stability in the chaotic turnover of the wild. The territory was rich, lush grasses, fed vast herds of impala and wildebeest, and the waterholes remained full even as the dry season began to crisp the edges of the plains. The pride was led by 2 aging males, the Marsh brothers. In their prime, they had been formidable, a wall of muscle that kept intruders at bay. But time is the one predator no lion can outrun. The brothers were 12 years old now. Their teeth were worn down to yellow stumps, their manes were thinning, and their hips jutted out sharply against their skin. They spent their days sleeping in the shade of the acacia trees, dreaming of battles they could no longer fight. They were kings in name only. The real power of the pride lay with the females. There were 8 of them, a sisterhood forged in blood and milk. And at the bottom of the hierarchy, scraping by on the edges of the group, was Cari. Cari was small for a lioness. She lacked the heavy, muscular build of her sisters. Her ears were tattered, not from fighting for dominance, but from the scraps of survival. She was the one who ate last. She was the one who had to fight the hardest for a patch of shade. But what she lacked in size, she made up for in something that is harder to measure, but infinitely more dangerous: intensity. Cari had 3 cubs, 2 females, sleek and healthy, and 1 male. They called him Saul. Saul was different. He had been born with a twisted rear leg, a congenital defect that made his gait awkward and slow. In the brutal meritocracy of the wild, a cub like Saul shouldn't have survived his first week. Nature is not cruel, but it is indifferent. It favors efficiency. A lame cub slows down the pride. A slow pride starves. The biological logic dictated that Saul be abandoned. And yet, he was still here, 5 months old. His eyes were wide and golden, filled with a curiosity that hadn't yet been crushed by the harsh reality of his existence. He couldn't tumble and wrestle with the same explosive energy as his sisters. When they raced through the tall grass, chasing grasshoppers and practicing the pounce, Saul would lag behind, hopping on 3 legs, dragging the 4th. Any other mother would have let him fade away. It's a common sight in the bush, a mother stopping to wait for a lagging cub, then waiting a little less, until finally she doesn't stop at all. But Cari stopped. Every single time. When Saul stumbled, she would pause, her tail twitching, waiting for him to catch up. She groomed him with an obsessive tenderness, her rough tongue cleaning the dust from his twisted limb. She pushed him toward the kill when the pride finally allowed them to eat. Snarling at her own sisters if they tried to muscle him out. She was breaking the laws of energy conservation. She was investing resources in a bad asset. Biologists watching the pride predicted tragedy. She's wasting her energy, Dr. Aris Thorne noted in his field journal on August 20th. The male cub is a drain on her caloric intake. When the dry season peaks, she will have to choose between him and her own survival. And nature always chooses self-preservation. Dr. Thorne was a brilliant scientist. He understood data, he understood genetics, but he didn't understand Cari. The morning of September 4th broke with a deceptive stillness. The sun bled over the horizon in a wash of bruised purple and orange, burning the mist off the marshlands. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of sage and dry earth. It was quiet. Too quiet. The birds weren't singing. The impala, usually grazing in the open at this hour, were huddled under the brush, their ears swiveling like radar dishes. The Marsh brothers were asleep near a termite mound, oblivious. But Cari was awake. She sat on a small rise of land, her body rigid. Her amber eyes were locked on the southern horizon, scanning the tall yellow grass. A lion's vision is tailored to detect movement, but it was her nose that told the story first. The wind shifted, carrying a scent that made the hair along her spine stand up like copper wire. It was a scent of musk, old blood, and raw testosterone. It was the scent of a stranger. A strange male in established territory means only one thing: war. But not a war for land, a war for genetics. This is the dark chapter of lion biology that most documentaries gloss over. When a new coalition of males takes over a pride, their first order of business is not to mate, but to kill. They must erase the genetic legacy of the previous kings. If a lioness is nursing cubs, she will not go into estrus. She cannot become pregnant with the new male's offspring. So, to speed up the process, the new males will hunt down and kill every cub under 9 months old. It is infanticide. It is brutal, efficient, and encoded into their DNA. Cari knew this scent. Every instinct in her body screamed danger. She turned to her cubs, who were playing in the dust behind her. She let out a low, guttural chuff, a specific sound that means freeze. The 2 female cubs dropped instantly, flattening their bellies against the earth. Saul, slower to react, looked up at her, blinking. She nudged him hard with her nose, forcing him down into the cover of the grass. Then she turned back to the south. The grass parted, and Titan emerged. He didn't sneak. He didn't crouch. He walked out into the open with the terrifying confidence of a creature that has nothing to fear. The morning light caught the scars on his face, illuminating the map of violence he carried on his skin. He stopped, 300 meters away, and let out a roar that shook the leaves on the acacia trees. It wasn't just a sound, it was a physical force, a low-frequency vibration that rattled in the chest of every living thing within 5 kilometers. It was a declaration. I am here. This is mine. The Marsh brothers woke up. They scrambled to their feet, roaring back, posturing. But their roars were thin, wheezing. They were the sounds of old men shouting at a storm. Titan didn't even break stride. He began to trot toward them, his head low, his shoulders rolling with hydraulic power. The battle that followed was short. It was almost pitiable. The Marsh brothers met him halfway, trying to use numbers to overwhelm him. But they were brittle, and Titan was iron. He swatted the first brother aside with a paw strike that likely cracked a rib, sending the 400-pound lion tumbling into the dust. The second brother hesitated, a fatal mistake. Titan launched himself, teeth flashing, and drove the older male into the dirt. There was a flurry of dust and snarling, and then silence. The Marsh brothers broke. They turned and ran, abandoning the pride, abandoning the territory, abandoning everything to save their own skins. The line of defense was gone. In less than 3 minutes, the throne had fallen. Titan stood panting over the battlefield, blood dripping from a gash on his shoulder, but he looked energized. He looked excited. He turned his massive head toward the termite mound, where the females were huddled. The other lionesses were frozen in a paralysis of fear. They knew the protocol. When the kings fall, the queens must submit. It is the only way to survive. They would lose their cubs. It was the price of the transition. They would mourn, and then they would mate. The circle of life would continue. One by one, the lionesses lowered their heads, averting their gaze, signaling submission. They were accepting the inevitable. All except one. Cari was backing away, her body low to the ground. She was herding her cubs, pushing them deeper into the thicket of wait-a-bit thorns. She wasn't submitting, she was calculating. Titan saw the movement. His eyes locked onto her. He saw the small, tumbling shapes behind her. Target acquired. He started to move toward her. Not a run, but a fast, predatory walk. His focus narrowed. The rest of the pride ceased to exist for him. There was only the objective, the cubs. Cari stopped. She realized she couldn't outrun him. Not with Saul. The logic of the situation crashed down on her. If she ran, Saul would fall behind. Titan would catch him in seconds. If she stayed and fought, she would die. A 130-kilogram female against a 225-kilogram male is not a fight, it is an execution. But as Titan closed the distance 100 meters, 80 meters, 50 meters, something snapped in the chemistry of her brain. Biologists call it maternal defensive aggression. It is a flood of oxytocin and adrenaline that overrides the self-preservation centers of the brain. It turns fear into fuel. It turns a mother into a monster. Titan was closing in. He could smell the milk on the cubs. He broke into a trot, his lips peeling back to reveal 3-inch canines designed to crush vertebrae. He was looking at Saul. He saw the limp. He saw the easy kill. He was 30 meters away when Cari moved. She didn't retreat. She stepped forward. She placed her body directly between the monster and her children. She lowered her head, ears pinned flat against her skull, her tail lashing violently from side to side. She let out a sound that was not a roar. It was a scream, a high-pitched, demonic shriek of absolute warning. Titan faltered for a fraction of a second. This wasn't the script. Females run. Females submit. They don't stand their ground against a king. He roared at her, a blast of noise meant to terrify her into submission. "Move," the roar said. "Move or die." Cari didn't blink. She dug her claws into the earth, anchoring herself. Titan charged. The distance evaporated. 20 meters. 10 meters. The ground shook with the impact of his paws. He was a wall of muscle and death, coming to erase everything she loved. And in that final second, as the shadow of the king fell over her, Cari did the unthinkable. She launched herself into the air. She didn't wait for the impact. She met it. The collision sounded like a car crash. The laws of physics are indifferent to courage. Force equals mass times acceleration. By that metric, the collision between Cari and Titan should have shattered her spine instantly. Titan was a moving wall of bone and muscle, carrying the momentum of a freight train. Cari was a fraction of his weight. But biology has a wildcard variable that physics cannot account for: desperation. When Cari launched herself, she didn't aim for his throat, a suicidal move against a male with a heavy mane designed specifically to protect that jugular. Instead, she twisted in midair, a maneuver of acrobatic violence that no researcher had ever documented in the Marsh Pride before. She slammed into his shoulder, not to knock him over, but to use him as a springboard. Her claws, razor-sharp hooks of keratin, sank deep into the sensitive skin of his nose and ear. She latched on. Titan roared, a sound that was less a battle cry and more a shock of pain. He threw his massive head violently to the side, trying to dislodge the lioness clinging to his face like a demon. The force of his thrash whipped Cari through the air, her body flailing, but she didn't let go. For 4 agonizing seconds, she hung there, her back claws scrambling for purchase on his chest, raking ribbons of red down his golden coat. She was blinding him, she was confusing him, she was buying time. Titan, blinded by pain and fury, swiped blindly with a paw the size of a dinner plate. The blow connected with Cari's flank. The sound was sickening, a dull, wet thud that knocked the wind out of her lungs and sent her spinning into the dust 5 meters away. She hit the ground hard, rolling twice, her ribs screaming in protest. Any other lioness would have stayed down. The blow was enough to crack bone, but Cari bounced up as if she were made of rubber. She didn't look at Titan. She looked at the grass behind him where the cubs were frozen in terror. "Run!" her body language screamed. She let out a sharp, coughing bark. The 2 female cubs bolted. They were fast, their survival instincts overriding their confusion. But Saul scrambled to his feet, his back leg buckling under him. He tried to run, but it was a hobbling, 3-legged gait. He was slow, painfully, terrifyingly slow. Titan shook the blood from his eyes. He saw the lioness standing between him and his prize. He saw the blood dripping from her mouth. And for the first time in his life, the king hesitated. Predators are calculators. They weigh risk against reward. A lioness defending cubs is known to be dangerous, but usually a show of force is enough to break her nerve. This female wasn't breaking. She was snarling, her teeth bared, her eyes dilated into black pools of absolute violence. She looked ready to die, and more importantly, she looked ready to take an eye with her. Titan growled, a low rumble that vibrated the ground, but he didn't charge immediately. He was assessing the damage to his nose. That hesitation was all Cari needed. She turned and sprinted after her cubs. She didn't look back. She caught up to Saul, nudging him, practically shoving him forward with her nose. "Move! Move! Move!" They vanished into the thick elephant grass just as Titan shook off his shock and lunged forward. But the moment was gone. The dense vegetation swallowed them. Titan stopped at the edge of the thicket, blood dripping from his torn ear onto the dry earth. He didn't pursue. Not yet. He knew something Cari didn't. The marsh territory was surrounded by open plains. To escape him, she would have to cross the dead zone, a stretch of arid, coverless land that separated the marsh from the rocky outcrops to the north. He didn't need to run. He just needed to track. He let out a roar that echoed like a death sentence. "Run, little mother. There is nowhere to go." 3 miles away, in the dense cover of a dried riverbed, Cari finally collapsed. Her breathing was ragged, her sides heaving like bellows. A thin trickle of blood ran from her nose. The blow to her flank had done damage, likely a bruised kidney or a cracked rib. Every breath was a knife in her side. But she didn't sleep. She sat up, ears swiveling, eyes scanning the horizon behind them. The cubs huddled against her belly. The two females were shaking, traumatized by the violence they had just witnessed. Saul was panting, his bad leg held awkwardly in the air. He licked Cari's paw, a gesture of comfort. She looked down at him, and the fierce green fire in her eyes softened into something profoundly sad. To understand why Cari fought a giant for a broken cub, you have to go back 5 months, to the night Saul was born. It was April. The rainy season was ending. Cari had birthed her litter in a secluded den under the roots of a fallen baobab tree. It was a difficult birth. The first 2 cubs, the females, arrived easily, but the third, the male, was stuck. For 2 hours, Cari labored in silence, knowing that any noise could attract hyenas. When Saul finally emerged, he wasn't breathing. He was blue, limp. The umbilical cord was wrapped tight around his rear leg, cutting off circulation. Most mothers would have eaten him. It sounds horrific to human ears, but in the wild, protein cannot be wasted. A dead cub is a source of energy that allows the mother to produce milk for the living ones. It is the cold arithmetic of survival. But Cari didn't eat him. She licked him. She massaged his small chest with her rough tongue, over and over, stimulating his lungs. For 10 minutes there was no response. And then a gasp. A tiny, pathetic squeak of life. Saul breathed. But the damage to his leg was done. The circulation loss had stunted the development of the muscle and bone. As he grew, the leg remained twisted, slightly shorter than the others. When he walked, he had to swing his hip out to compensate. In the Marsh Pride, weakness was a sin. The other lionesses noticed it immediately. When the cubs were introduced to the Pride at 6 weeks old, the reception was cold. The dominant females would snarl if Saul came too close. They wouldn't groom him. When the Pride killed an impala, the other cubs were allowed to eat alongside the adults, but Saul was pushed away. The runt, the researchers called him. He's a ghost walking. A tour guide had told his guests just a week before Titan arrived. Don't get attached to that one. He won't make it past the rainy season. But Cari became his shield. She developed a behavior that ethologists call preferential investment. She would hunt smaller prey hares, dik-diks, even large lizards, specifically for him. She would carry him in her mouth over rough terrain, long after he was too heavy to be carried. She slept curled around him, creating a physical barrier between him and the rest of the Pride. She was fighting a quiet war against her own family to keep him alive. And now, staring at him in the dried riverbed, she knew the war had just escalated. They were no longer fighting for scraps of meat. They were fighting for their lives. She checked Saul's leg. The frantic run had taken a toll. The paw was swollen, the pads raw and bleeding. He winced when she touched it with her nose. He couldn't run another mile. Not at that pace. But they couldn't stay here. The wind was blowing from the south, carrying their scent away from Titan, but the wind would change. It always did. Cari stood up. A jolt of pain shot through her side, making her stumble. She gritted her teeth. She nudged the females. Up! She nudged Saul. Up! They had to cross the dead zone. The dead zone was an ecological anomaly, a 10-kilometer stretch of scorched earth between the lush marsh and the northern hills. It was a graveyard of bleached bones and dust devils. No water, no shade. And worse, it was the contested borderland between the lions and their ancient, eternal enemies, the spotted hyenas. Specifically, the Bone Breaker clan. A clan of 60 hyenas ruled this wasteland. They were massive, matriarchal, and incredibly intelligent. They knew that any lion caught alone in the open was fair game. A single lioness with cubs? That wasn't a threat. That was a buffet. Cari stepped out of the riverbed and onto the hardpan clay. The sun was directly overhead now, hammering down with ultraviolet violence. The heat shimmered off the ground, distorting the distance. The northern hills looked like a mirage, impossibly far away. She set a grueling pace. Not a run, but a relentless marching walk. Saul struggled immediately. The hard ground was unforgiving on his bad leg. Every step was a calculation of balance and pain. He fell behind by 10 meters, then 20. Cari stopped. She looked back. She didn't go to him. She waited. This was the hardest lesson. She couldn't carry him anymore. He was too big, nearly 15 kilograms. He had to walk. If she babied him now, he would die. He had to find the strength within his own broken body. Saul looked at his mother. He let out a soft mewl of complaint. Cari didn't move. She just watched him, her eyes hard and demanding. Come on. Saul dragged himself up. He found a rhythm, step, step, swing, step, step, swing. He caught up. They moved on. By mid-afternoon, they were halfway across the dead zone. The heat was suffocating. The cubs' tongues lolled out, dripping saliva. They were dehydrated. Cari was worse. The blood loss from the fight, combined with the lack of water, was making her dizzy. The horizon began to tilt. And then she saw them. Shadows moving in the shimmering heat. 3 shapes. Loping, hunchbacked silhouettes with rounded ears. Hyenas. Scouts. They weren't attacking. They were just watching. They were paralleling the lion's path, keeping a distance of 200 meters. They were assessing the situation. They saw the limp. They saw the blood on Cari's flank. They were communicating with whoops and giggles that carried for miles, calling in the rest of the clan. Cari stopped. She pulled the cubs in close. Her hackles rose. This was the nightmare scenario. If the clan arrived before they reached the hills, it was over. Titan was behind them. The army of bone breakers was gathering on their flanks. She needed a strategy. She couldn't fight 60 hyenas. She couldn't outrun them. She looked at the terrain. The flat emptiness was broken only by a single solitary feature about a kilometer ahead. The spire. It was a termite mound, but ancient and massive, towering 4 meters into the air like a jagged finger of concrete. It was eroded and steep, hardened by decades of sun. High ground. It was their only chance. Cari let out a low growl to the cubs. The tone was different this time. It wasn't run. It was fight. She began to trot toward the spire. The hyena scouts saw the change in pace. They chattered excitedly and moved closer, closing the gap to 100 meters. They were testing her. One of them, a ragged male with half an ear missing, made a mock charge, darting in to snap at Saul's heels. Cari spun around with lightning speed. She roared a dry, raspy sound that still carried enough menace to make the hyena skid to a halt in the dust. She swiped the air, missing him by inches. The hyena giggled and retreated, but he didn't run away. He was laughing because he knew the math. 1 lioness, 3 cubs, 3 hyenas now, 4, 5. More were appearing from the heat haze. The cavalry was arriving. Move! Cari shoved Saul toward the termite mound. They reached the base of the spire just as the main pack began to crest the horizon. It was a sea of black and spots, 20 hyenas, 30. The mound was steep, almost vertical near the top. Cari scrambled up first, her claws digging into the rock-hard clay. She reached a small ledge halfway up and turned to grab the females. She hauled them up by the scruffs of their necks, tossing them onto the safety of the perch. Then she reached for Saul. He was scrambling at the base, his bad leg slipping on the loose dirt. He couldn't get traction. He was jumping, clawing, trying to pull himself up, but he was failing. Behind him, the hyenas were closing in. The lead female of the clan, a massive beast known as the matriarch, was leading the charge. She was huge, nearly the size of a lioness herself, with jaws that could crush a buffalo femur. She saw the struggling cub. She saw dinner. She lunged. Cari leaned down from the ledge, stretching her neck to its absolute limit. Her jaws snapped open. Saul felt the hot breath of the hyena on his tail. He let out a scream of terror and threw himself upward in one final, desperate leap. Cari's teeth clamped onto his shoulder. She pulled. The matriarch's jaws snapped shut on empty air, millimeters from Saul's dragging foot. Cari yanked him up onto the ledge just as the tide of hyenas crashed against the base of the mound. They leaped and snapped, their teeth clicking together like steel traps, but the ledge was just out of reach. 6 feet up. Safe. For now. Cari stood on the narrow ledge, panting, bleeding, exhausted. Below her, a sea of 30 predators circled, laughing, waiting for them to fall. To the south, Titan was tracking their scent. She looked at Saul. He was huddled against the clay, trembling violently. He looked up at her, his eyes wide with the realization of what the world actually was. It wasn't a playground. It was a slaughterhouse. But then, he did something that surprised her. He stopped, trembling. He looked over the edge at the hyenas snapping below, and he let out a sound. It wasn't a roar. It was a squeak, a high-pitched, pathetic attempt at a growl. But his ears were pinned back. His small claws were unsheathed. He wasn't hiding behind her anymore. He was standing beside her. The anomaly wasn't just that Cari had fought a king. The anomaly was that the broken cub, against all biological probability, was starting to fight back. Night was falling. The temperature was dropping, and in the distance, the roar of Titan echoed closer. They were trapped between a monster and an army. But as the first stars appeared over the Serengeti, Cari licked the blood from Saul's shoulder and settled down to wait. She wasn't dead yet, and until the last breath left her body, neither were they. Night in the dead zone is not silent. It is a cacophony of psychological warfare. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and black, the temperature plummeted 20 degrees in an hour. But the cold wasn't the problem. The noise was. The hyenas below the spire had settled into a siege rhythm. They weren't attacking anymore, they were waiting. Every few minutes, one would let out a whoop, a rising, spectral call that signaled to the rest of the clan that the prey was still trapped. Then another would answer with that manic, giggling chatter that sounds frighteningly like human laughter. It is a sound designed by evolution to unnerve, to induce panic, to force mistakes. Perched 6 feet up on the narrow clay ledge, Cari was a statue of concentration. She hadn't slept. She couldn't. If she drifted off, even for a moment, a cub could slip. If a cub slipped, it was gone. Saul was pressed against her back leg, shivering. The adrenaline of the climb had worn off, replaced by the throbbing ache in his twisted limb and the gnawing emptiness in his belly. They hadn't eaten in 2 days. The thirst was becoming a physical weight, a dry stone in their throats. But Cari wasn't focused on the thirst. She was focused on the wind. It had shifted again. It was blowing from the north now, pushing their scent back the way they had come, back toward the marsh, back toward Titan. To a human, the darkness was absolute, but to a lion, the night is a grayscale landscape of high-contrast detail. Cari's eyes, equipped with a reflective layer called the tapetum lucidum, amplified the starlight. She could see the individual spots on the hyenas pacing below. She could see the glint of their wet noses. And at 2 a.m., she saw something else. Beyond the ring of hyenas, out in the deep darkness of the plains, a pair of eyes reflected the moonlight. They were set wide apart. They were higher off the ground than a hyena's eyes, and they weren't moving with the skittish, loping rhythm of a scavenger. They were still, watching. Titan had arrived. The king had tracked them across 10 kilometers of hardpan, guided by the faint scent of blood from Cari's wound. He stood at the edge of the hyena circle, a ghost in the darkness. He assessed the scene with the cold detachment of a general. He saw the termite mound. He saw the lioness and the cubs trapped on top. He saw the 30 hyenas between him and his target. For a lesser male, this would be a checkmate. No single lion, not even a male of Titan size, willingly engages a clan of 30 hyenas. The risk of injury is too high. If they hamstring him, he dies. The logical move was to wait or to leave. But Titan wasn't driven by logic anymore. He was driven by the biological imperative to finish the job, and perhaps by a flicker of bruised ego. The female had embarrassed him. She had escaped. That could not stand. Cari saw him. Her ears flattened. She pulled the cubs tighter against the clay. She knew what was about to happen. The hyenas smelled him a second later. The reaction was instantaneous. The giggling stopped. The clan went silent. 30 heads turned in unison toward the darkness. The matriarch stepped forward, her hackles raised, her tail bristling. A male lion was a threat, but one male against 30? Those were odds the clan liked. The matriarch let out a low, rallying war cry. The clan formed a phalanx, a wall of snapping teeth facing the intruder. They were ready to mob him. This was the moment Titan had been waiting for. He didn't roar. He didn't posture. He charged. But he didn't charge the hyenas. He charged through them. He hit the line like a cannonball. He wasn't trying to fight them. He was trying to scatter them. He swatted a hyena aside with a blow that sent it cartwheeling into the darkness. He snapped the spine of another with a single crunch of his jaws. He was a whirlwind of violence, cutting a path straight toward the termite mound. The hyenas panicked. The sheer audacity of the attack broke their formation. They scattered, yipping in confusion, reforming into smaller groups to nip at his flanks. Titan ignored them. He reached the base of the spire. He looked up, his eyes locked with Cari's. He was 6 feet below her, close enough that she could smell the rot on his breath. He reared up on his hind legs, his massive paws scraping against the clay, his claws reaching for the ledge. He was going to climb. Cari stood up. She had nowhere to go. She had no leverage, but she had gravity. As Titan's paws hooked onto the lip of the ledge, pulling his massive bulk upward, Cari did the only thing she could. She swiped. But she didn't swipe at his face. She swiped at the ground under the cubs. She unleashed a cloud of dust and loose clay into Titan's upturned eyes. It was a dirty trick, a desperate trick, but it worked. Titan blinked, shaking his head, his grip faltering for a fraction of a second. And in that second, the hyenas realized their mistake. They saw the male lion exposed, his belly stretched out, his attention focused upward. The matriarch didn't hesitate. She lunged and clamped her jaws onto Titan's tail. Pain is a universal language. Titan roared a sound of genuine agony this time and dropped back down to the ground to deal with the threat biting his rear. He spun around, exploding into fury, lashing out at the matriarch. Chaos erupted. The siege had broken. It was now a brawl, Titan versus the clan. Cari didn't watch the fight. She didn't wait to see who won. She saw the gap in the circle. The hyenas were distracted. The king was occupied. Now, she nudged the cubs. Jump. It was a 6-foot drop. The females landed gracefully. Saul landed awkwardly, tumbling onto his bad shoulder, letting out a sharp cry. Cari landed beside him, nudging him up before he could even process the pain. They ran. They ran into the darkness, away from the spire, away from the noise of snapping bones and roaring lions. They ran blindly, deeper into the dead zone, toward the only place where neither lions nor hyenas would follow. The sand sea. By dawn, the sounds of the battle had faded into a ghostly silence. They had walked for 4 hours without stopping. The terrain had changed. The hard-pan clay had given way to soft, shifting sand. The vegetation had vanished completely. No grass, no trees, just endless, rolling dunes of red dust. They had crossed the border of the habitable world. Cari stopped at the crest of a dune. She looked back. The horizon was empty. No Titan, no hyenas, just the shimmering heat haze rising with the morning sun. They were safe from the killer, but now they faced a slower, crueler executioner, the desert. Saul collapsed. He didn't lie down. He simply ceased to function. His legs folded, and he face-planted into the sand. He was severely dehydrated, his skin tented when Cari licked him. His eyes were dull, the golden fire dimmed to a muddy brown. The female cubs were in similar shape, panting shallowly, their ribs showing through their fur like the rungs of a ladder. Cari knew the signs. They had maybe 24 hours before organ failure set in. Lions are not camels. They have high metabolic rates. They need water to process protein, to cool their bodies. Without it, their blood thickens, their kidneys shut down, and they die. She needed to find water, but in the sand sea, water doesn't exist. Unless you know where to look. Cari began to dig. She chose a spot in the trough between two dunes, where a faint, dry scrub bush clung to existence. She dug frantically, her paws throwing up clouds of red sand. She dug until her claws hit something harder. Damp earth. Roots. She chewed on the roots, crushing the fibers to extract a few drops of bitter moisture. She spat the pulp onto the sand and nudged Saul toward it. Eat. He licked the damp pulp. It wasn't water, but it was wet. He chewed weakly. It was enough to wet his tongue. She did this for an hour, digging, chewing, feeding the pulp to her cubs. It was a starvation ration, barely enough to keep them alive, but it bought them time. As the sun reached its zenith, turning the sand into a skillet, Cari ushered them into the shade of a small rock overhang. They slept the sleep of the dead. But Saul didn't sleep. The pain in his leg was a constant thrumming noise in his head. But something else was happening inside him. The fear of the last 48 hours, the sight of Titan, the teeth of the hyenas, the endless running had burned away the innocence of cubhood. He watched his mother sleeping. She was exhausted, her flank rising and falling in jerky rhythms. He saw the dried blood on her ear. He saw the way her ribs jutted out. He realized, with a clarity that usually comes only to adult predators, that she was breaking herself for him. He looked at his own leg, the twisted thing that made him slow, the thing that made him a burden. He stood up. He willed the leg to hold his weight. It trembled. He locked the joint. He took a step, then another. He walked to the edge of the shade and looked out at the desert. He saw a lizard scuttling across the sand, a skink, fast, erratic. Saul's instinct triggered. Prey. Usually he would wait for his sisters to chase it. Usually he would wait for Cari to catch it for him. But Cari was asleep. Saul crouched. He couldn't explode forward like a normal lion. He couldn't rely on speed. He had to rely on something else. Calculation. He watched the lizard's path. It was moving from rock to rock. He predicted where it would go next. He didn't run at it. He moved to intercept it. He dragged his body through the sand, belly low, using the contours of the dunes to hide his approach. He waited. The lizard darted to the next rock. Saul didn't pounce. He swiped, a short, controlled hook with his good paw. His claws snagged the lizard's tail. He pinned it. He bit down. The crunch was small, insignificant in the grand scheme of the universe. But to Saul, it was a thunderclap. He had killed, alone, king. But she was the lioness who broke the world.